Yeah, thank you. In this paper, we want to explore the possibility of subjects combining with each other. This possibility we can call subject combinationism. We'll first present some problems in arguing for subject combinationism. Then we will demonstrate how at least some of these problems can be resolved by considering the example of the initiatory experience in Sri Vidya. Finally, we'll make a case for why we can take the examples from Sri Vidya seriously in our context and demonstrate how that allows us to argue for subject combinationism, which we're going to call SC for brevity. So, before we set up what the subject combination problem is, we need to first look at what phenomenal states are. Phenomenal states are mental states which are considered to have phenomenal properties. There are different ways in which phenomenal properties or states have come to be characterized. They've come to be considered to have a what it is like character, goes back to Nagel and Jackson and so on. Alternatively, phenomenal properties are said to be grounded in or characterized by their subjective character. So in our talk, we'll confine ourselves only to phenomenal states insofar as they are characterized by their subjective character. Now, by subjective character, we also want to gloss it as being perspectival character. Anyway, given the above understanding of phenomenal states as being characterized by, subjective properties, we end up with the subject combination problem. SC emerges as a problem because if phenomenal states are necessarily subjective or perspectival, then it doesn't make sense for us to say that perspectives can combine in a way to yield a new perspective. In other words, we know that there can be, for example, a series of 100 subjective states which don't necessitate the 101st subjective state. This yields, this is what yields a subjective combination problem. So this is schematic representation of that problem that you can take a look at here. However, we'll try and show how SC is possible in this and the next section. However, Sam Coleman has come up with another set of arguments to show that SC or subject combinationism doesn't even arise as a possibility. He wants to say that SC as a problem emerges only because of our commitment to 1 and 2. If we are not committed to 1 and 2, we won't face SC at all as a problem, and that's his tactic. We'll look at his arguments for disabling the problem, and we'll show why he is mistaken. So to counter one, Coleman argues that we need not characterize phenomenal properties in terms of its subjective character. In fact, he seems to be making the stronger claim that we don't need to think of phenomenal properties via their subjective character in any way. His argument is that a subject is merely a unifying concept, as it were, for collecting together different kinds of phenomenal states. He thinks there is no need for us to posit that unifying concept. So if a person is feeling cold and feeling tired and feeling hungry, the macro experience, if there is one, of feeling all those things at once is constituted totally by the necessarily unifying aspects of feeling cold, tired, and hungry without a need for a subject. He argues that one doesn't need a subject that somehow subtends, as it were, the different feelings one may have. The feelings themselves are enough. Argue against Coleman, Coleman points to how there are many cases of such qualitative combination happening all the time. He talks about two kinds. One is what he calls additive combination. Additive combination is when the qualities of the composite or the organized set of those instantiated by those parts. An example here would be a painting, is made up of different color patches, so it's additive. The second kind of combination is what he calls a blended form of combination, like how blue and red when mixed gives purple. In these cases, Coleman says there's a clear-cut combination that's happening, which is such that the combined color is grounded in the two colors that go to make them up. So we're going to block Coleman here. However, there are three considerations that seem to suggest that Coleman's arguments might not have diffused the SC problem after all. One, Coleman has only sidestepped the problem and not resolved it. He has said that we can have phenomenal blending, but he hasn't argued the subjects don't thereby exist. In other words, from Coleman, we can gather that he's only saying the subject combination problem doesn't arise only insofar as we think phenomenal properties are subjective in nature. However, he hasn't given a separate argument for why there can't be subjects or subject combination. That is, as long as it makes sense to talk of subjects, we think we can still raise the problem of why or how subjects can combine. The second problem with him is that it's difficult to admit the complete veracity of phenomenal blending as Coleman describes it. Even if there is phenomenal blending, that fact does not explain why some kinds of phenomenal experiences combine with each other and not with some other experiences. For example, my experience of hunger will only combine with my experience of cold and never yours. Finally, one may object to Coleman's position that there can be phenomenal qualities without any subject instantiating them. One way is to refer to seemingly evident epistemological truths, such as, for example, awareness, which seems to be self-reflexive. So while undergoing a phenomenal experience, it's possible for a subject to be aware of the experience in a way which is unique to the having of that experience. In other words, when we say phenomenal experience is instantiated by a subject, there is something to that phenomenal experience which is the possession of a particular what it is like character. While we may not think that all phenomenal awareness is reflexive, which I think is Galen Strawson's stronger thesis, we say that self-awareness is a feature of phenomenal experience and that necessitates a subject to which that awareness is revealed. Thus, Coleman's response to the combination problem does not get us out of SC or subject combinationism. We still have subjects and we still have to deal with the possibility of combination and answer the question of whether it is possible. So far we've looked at why Coleman's strategy is not a great strategy. So we're still left with the possibility of subjects and thereby the possibility of subject combinations. We're going to talk a bit more about how to resolve the subject combination in the next sections. But before that, we're still faced with whether SC in itself may not conflict with other issues and intuitions we have. One such intuition that we have is that all subjects are unitary. We can call this the subject is unitary principle. SUP tells us the following, right? Each unique subject seems intuitively to be a deeply unified whole, whether this unity is based on epistemological or metaphysical considerations. Chalmers and Bain's view of substantive unity, for example, captures this idea. He says that, to take an example, it seems possible that all of my visual experiences are subsumed by a single encompassing state of consciousness corresponding to my visual field. More generally, my visual and auditory experiences might all be subsumed by a single encompassing state of perceptual consciousness. And it does not seem unreasonable to suppose that there's a single encompassing state of consciousness that subsumes all of my experiences, perceptual, bodily, emotional, cognitive, and any others, end quote. While this is neutral with regard to panpsychism or cosmopsychism, they do hint that two conscious states are subsumed under one consciousness. It is not a trivial form of subsumption where it is possible for any two states to be subsumed under any encompassing state of consciousness. If two conscious states on this view are subsumed under one consciousness, neither of them can also be subsumed by another. So what we want to say is that there is subject combinationism. In Coleman's response to block it seems to be flawed, but we still are faced with subject combinationism as a problem. And to make matters worse, it seems to conflict with our intuition regarding what we think a subject is, which is that it seems to go against SUP. So we are left with a harder task, as it were. So now we are going to move to the next set of slides.
What we want to do in the next little bit
is we want to talk about a very specific kind of experience,
in Sri Vidya, and it exists in other aligned systems as well. And this is called Diksha. In a Shaiva context, Christopher Wallace has already talked about the idea of a permeable, porous, and mutable self, and he is building on Fred Smith's formulation of a porous self in the context of possession. Initiation is generally considered to be a ceremonial act or a set of ceremonial acts which mark the entry of an individual into a new phase of their existence. All religions or most religions are considered to have initiatory rites. Here we look at initiation in the context of Sri Vidya. Practices in Sri Vidya, including those which are oriented towards liberation from the cycle of rebirth, are grounded in Diksha. There is no practice, Sri Vidya practitioners say, that are ever efficacious unless they begin with Diksha. And there's a folk etymology of Diksha which says that the Di in Diksha stands for granting the divine state, and Kra stands for the removal of impurities. This granting can be done in a few different ways, including passing down a mantra, or even looking into the eyes of a disciple, or by the act of the disciple grasping the guru's feet. Sometimes it can have a few different components, as this example from Lakshmidhara shows us. And Lakshmidhara is he belongs to one of the two major schools of Sri Vidya. The feet of the guru should be grasped at midnight. By that power of the guru, the great Shaiva piercing of light takes place as a result of the joining of the hands and the hands of the guru and the forehead of the disciple, repeated teaching of the mantra and instruction. Bhaskara Raya describes the nature of the relationship effected through Diksha in a way that such that the breath of the disciple becomes the guru. So the guru and the disciple are described in different ways as coming to be unified in a way that we don't normally think of as possible for in regular human interaction. The Diksha may have a variety of components, but Bhaskar Raya's account of initiation highlights an important aspect of the content of the Diksha. The guru, looking into the sight of the disciple with his own sight, through the powers of yoga, draws out his own awareness through his eyes and through the eyes of the disciple, with himself as the awareness of the disciple pierces his mind. That was about as clear as mud. The idea is that the first person experience of the guru is somehow made to be also the first person experience of the disciple. The exact processes of initiation need not concern us here because we are interested in the way that it sees two subjects as relating to one another. Dempsey quotes the experience of an American woman at a Sri Vidya temple in Rochester, and this is in a 2006 book. So the priest and the guru at that temple touched the forehead of this woman, Linda, with his hand, and Linda described it as, quote, "It was the strangest thing. I felt this intense burning electric sensation throughout me. It burned the strongest at the base of my spine, in the pit of my stomach, in the middle of my chest, the base of my neck, middle of my forehead, etc. The palms of my hands and bottoms of my feet also felt like they were on fire." As a result of these processes of Diksha, the guru and disciple are understood to be able to undergo the same identical experience. All accounts of Diksha in Sri Vidya context seem to point to such a view. For example, Linda's own experience of Diksha and the experience of the guru did produce more than normal effects in her psychological and phenomenological makeup. These different kinds of descriptions of Sri Vidya initiation suggest clearly that not only can the guru share their awareness with the disciple, their awareness can be for the disciple as if it were the disciple's own. His experiences or her experiences can be as if they were the disciple's own experiences through a kind of piercing of the disciple's awareness by the gurus. Here, there are different ways in which one can understand how this process of owning an experience works. There are different metaphors that are used within Sri Vidya. It is said, for example, that the guru, and on the other hand, it is said that the guru can access the disciple's experiences as well, because the guru can pierce the disciple's mind. After this throwing or this piercing, the experiences of the sender become available to the receiver, the same way as the receiver's own experiences are available to her. However, what from the different metaphors and experiential reports we gather is that the sender and the receiver are able to access each other's experiences or phenomenal properties for at least a small time. The testimony provided within Sri Vidya practices are strong evidence that there is a kind of subject combination where there's one phenomenal experience that is shared by two subjects. In the practices of Sri Vidya, there is neither complete dissolution either of the subjects, which means that SUP is conserved to a certain degree, as well as there being a phenomenal experience shared by two subjects. So we'd like to present Srividya as a case of subject combination.
In this section, we'll attempt to demonstrate how and why we think the Srividya examples describe a kind of experience that can help us think of subject combination. In the initiatory experience, we had an example where the same experience is said to be tied to two people. That is the initiator and the initiant. Initiator, let's say the guru, and the initiant, say disciple. From the first person perspective, when the initiator has a particular experience that is self-indexical or self-luminous from an epistemic perspective, then the initiant is also able to have the same experience, which not only is self-luminous in the sense that the initiator can know not only that it is his own experience, but also that the experience is the initiator's. This appears counterintuitive, but we could make it fit by saying that the initiator's experience happens to be one way of making sense of it is to say, the initiator's experience happens to be a type of experience, the type token distinction that may be instantiated in more than one subject, like the color blue in the sea and the ball. The blue is instantiated in both the sea, sky, and whatever. However, the descriptions in Srividya seem to preclude this possibility. They seem to insist that some kind of a boundary is crossed or pierced, such that the same token. So we're saying that to think of experience as merely a type that is being shared between the guru and the disciple doesn't quite fit the description of what that experience is within Srividya. So we want to make a stronger claim in keeping with what Srividya wants to say. If it were about types of experience, the claim is no different than two people, sharing the same pizza and so on. Here we want to present first how it is not necessary that if a phenomenal experience is always had by a subject, that experience need not only quantify as it were over one subject alone at a time. So we think of, given our intuitions about subjective unity and how experiences are had by a subject, we think that an experience quantifies as it were only over one subject. We want to make a case for why it need not. It can quantify the same identical experience, can quantify over more than one. In other words, we want to say it's not inconceivable that phenomenal properties can be ascribed to more than one token of subjective experience. However, this possibility of shared token experiences, right, which is a stronger claim than type experiences, where we can have the same phenomenal state being instantiated by two people at the same time, seems to run against our understanding of the concept of token phenomenal experiences. Each mental state is tokened by many features. So to say that two mental states are different, we usually posit that there is at least one feature that is not shared by one of the two. That's what makes two token two, right? So this difference in token state ought to follow the principle of the dissimilarity of the diverse, as Mctaggart calls it. The principle says that if there's at least one property that is not shared by two mental states or events, then they are necessarily different. In the case of mental states, we know that however similar to mental states may be, there will always be. So one way in which we say two token experiences are always necessarily different is to say that there are spatio-temporal properties that differ from one phenomenal state to another phenomenal state. Therefore, they can never be identical mental tokens, right? So our claim is that there are identical phenomenal states shared by more than one. So again, we're not arguing against the principle of dissimilarity of the diverse here. That's not our concern. However, we can question whether two tokens which differ only in their spatio-temporal properties are thereby two different tokens. So we want to. The idea is we want to say that there are mental tokens which can be different but also identical. We'll see how that works out. So let's take spatio-temporal properties, right? So however, we can question whether two tokens which differ only in their spatio-temporal properties are thereby two different tokens. If it is the case that there is at least one property let's say the spatiotemporal property that differentiates one mental token from the other, then we may not be able to establish any identity between two experiential tokens by the fact that they have different spatiotemporal properties. Here, I think to kind of help us resolve this, it might be useful to think about structural and non-structural properties of an experience. A structural property or informational or phenomenal experience, we can say, is that which can fully characterize a state using conceptual concepts, structural concepts alone, which could include logical or normic concepts, right? And this, some of the work Chalmers has already talked about. So we can say structural properties are extrinsic to an entity or event, since structure only characterizes an entity relationally in terms of their causal and other relations to other entities. A non-structural property, or what we call intrinsic property, is that which is inherent to an event or state. Phenomenal properties are inherent to a mental state such that conceptually they're said not to be capable of being described through structural terms. Phenomenal properties are intrinsic. Again, we don't have the space here to argue, but we're assuming we can establish, and it has been done before, that spatiotemporal features are extrinsic to phenomenal states. Ladyman's talked about it. If you have a Kantian view, that also talks about it. Then it's possible for two mental states to be identical intrinsically while being different extrinsically, right? So we could give the physicalist or the structuralist, their claim that these two different states have different spatiotemporal properties, and thereby, can I continue? Yeah. So they can be identical intrinsically while being different extrinsically. So that's our claim, in the sense that when we were trying to show that you can have identical phenomenal experiences which are intrinsically identical, even though they may share different spatiotemporal properties. So far we have shown that SC is possible, and also that from a metaphysical perspective, it is possible that one can have phenomenal experiences which are shared across two subjects. But again, I think the task is not done, because unless we show that how it is that one can epistemically access that knowledge, even if it's metaphysically possible, right? You need some kind of epistemic access to be able to kind of establish it well. So that one can know that one is an experiential, that one is in an experiential state that is also had by someone else. We have merely hinted at the possibility and not established anything concrete. So the rest of the section, Tarinee is going to talk about how we can have an epistemic proof, as it were, for the possibility that a phenomenal experience can be shared. Identical phenomenal experience can be shared by two subjects. Yeah.
So far, we've claimed that. Can I know people? So far, we have claimed that Srividya initiatory experiences will reveal how two subjects can have the same identical experience. In other words, according to Srividya, two people can gain access to the introspective or first-person aspect of each other's experiences. We've also said that it is conceivable that the same token experience can be shared by two subjects, such that those two subjects can be said to be partially grounded in each other. However, when we were exploring the idea, we faced the problem of epistemic limits, which tell us that our perception or intuition cannot reveal the possibility that two persons can share the same token experience. But the fact that perception can't reveal the possibility doesn't entail that there is no way in which one can know. We posit the faculty of extrasensory perception, which can reveal such experiences, for knowing that such subjects it's possible for subjects to be grounded partially in one another in this way. Here we will shamelessly use the work of Swami Medhananda, who has marshaled what he calls the argument for the epistemic value of supersensuous perception, to show that there is supersensory perception and that such perception can be authoritative, can be an authoritative source of knowledge. We will not go through all the elements in his argument, and it has to be understood within the context of his attempt to establish the possibility of the epistemic value of religious experience partly in the context of Vivekananda's thought, but mirroring his own argument, the structure of his own argument, we can construct a possible argument for making a similar case for the Srividya initiatory experience in the following way. Srividya initials and initiators exist. Within Srividya initiatory rights, there are cases where the guru or the initiator can be said to share the same phenomenal experience as the initiate or disciple. In such experiences, there is experiential or sensory justification for the guru and the disciple to believe that they share the same experience. Therefore, people other than the guru and disciple are rationally justified in believing that their perceptual experience of their mental states is as they report it to be, unless there are very good reasons to doubt the sincerity of the initiant and initiator. And therefore, people other than those participating in the initiatory experience are justified in believing that at least some people have had a veridical experience of sharing the same phenomenal experience. 1 through 5 shows that Srividya experiences are revealed through extrasensory perception, and that such perception can reveal epistemically the metaphysical possibility that there are experiences which are shared across aliens. Now we'll present briefly how this principle shows us there can be subject combination. An experience is necessarily tied to a subject. Experiences can be shared across subjects. When two subjects share experience, they're able to epistemically access the subjects that are possessors of the experience. In Srividya, if a guru and disciple have justification to hold the belief that they have the same self-identical experience, then they are able to intrinsically perceive or access the self of the other. And that is a form of merging or combining with another mind, and therefore subject combinationism is possible. If we admit that it is possible based on the epistemic value of initiatory experience in Srividya, then we might have to revisit the argument that we started out with. We can say that subject combination is possible, and so it is left for us to figure out how that can transform our understanding of phenomenal properties. We've already said that phenomenal properties, whether they can combine or not, can be shared across subjects. If that is the case, we can possibly rethink the first component of our argument. That is, it might be possible for us to reconsider the relation between subjects and phenomenal properties. And hopefully at this point, a fuller picture emerges. One aspect that still remains is whether what we have discussed really means that phenomenal subjective properties can combine. We would like to suggest that from the preceding ideas, you can make that case insofar as there can be phenomenal properties which are shared by subjects. So what we've tried to do is that subject combination is possible by resisting certain arguments against it. However, the possibility of subject combination doesn't help us in resolving the intuition that we have that subjects must not be able to combine. Srividya and the initiatory practices within Srividya show us how there can be subjects which are unities while still sharing or experiencing identical phenomenal states.
Thank you very much for your interesting